We're pleased to have with us here today a panel of 5 outstanding visual storytellers who have explored the theme of America. At other times, this would be an interesting and important panel, exploring what the theme of America means in the visual landscape. Today, with an insurmountable chasm dividing America and a new administration that is intent on undoing 250 years of a yet unfinished project that has been forging a truly democratic and free republic, this panel today takes on heightened urgency. In a discussion a few weeks ago with panelists, there was disagreement as to whether there is any hope to repair what today seems broken. Some of the panelists expressed deep pessimism after looking at centuries of racism, class division, misogyny, entitlement, and for a lack of a better word, just plain stupidity. Others understand the underbelly of America, but also celebrate the unbridled hope and courage that breaks through. And I look forward to a lively presentations and discussions today. And to not further take the wind out of the sails of the moderator, let me introduce Dudley M. Brooks. Originally from Baltimore, Dudley is the former deputy director of photography for the Washington Post, where he managed the creative strategy and production of photo-oriented content for the features, local, and sports departments. He was also the photo editor for the Washington Post magazine before it was discontinued in 2022. From 2007 to 2014, he was the director of photography and senior photo editor for the monthly magazine Ebony and its weekly sister periodical, Jet. Brooks was also the assistant managing editor of photography at the Baltimore Sun and the co-creator director of the landmark 1990 photo book and exhibition, Songs of My People, African Americans, a Self-Portrait. So please join me in welcoming Dudley M. Brooks.
Thank you, Glenn. First off, welcome. That's the first thing. And then secondly, thanks to Glenn for this program and putting all this great work together for SDN. And he's very tireless about it, and he's very committed to making sure that storytelling photography, one, is paid attention to, and it's considered important, and that it has a vehicle and a venue to be seen by millions of people, and your points of view are valuable. I think it's interesting that we're having this conversation now on Americana, to kind of echo what Glenn just said. And it's interesting because, this is a topic I've been kind of delving into in one way or another for the past 45 years, although it wasn't necessarily just Americana, but it was the makeup of how America works and how America works with itself. And so with what's going on now, where a lot of the definitions are either being redefined or restructured or eliminated, to have a conversation like this today with a large group of people is a good thing. Conversation is a key word there because once the presenters are done, conversation is how we get things done. And it's also a very key way in how you understand photographs and how you understand what the presenter and what the photographer's intentions truly are. And you get a chance to dialogue on all of that. And I've always found that as opposed to just hearing someone, to be able to engage with what they've said is a very, very valuable thing to do, especially when we talk about picture stories and points of view. And today you're going to hear and see multiple points of view that form a sort of collective. So I want to belabor this too long before we get to real info. Oh, one more thing. I'm going to read a short bio on each person. And so it's an abbreviated bio, but I really encourage you, if you're not familiar with the presenters, to please go to the SDN site and read a fuller version so you can really understand what what these folks are doing. And they're doing some very worthy and valuable work. So anyway, first up, Nina Berman is a documentary photographer, filmmaker, journalist, and educator. Her work explores American politics, militarism, environmental issues, and post-violence trauma. She's the author of Purple Hearts, Back from Iraq, Trolley publication from 2004, portraits and interviews with wounded American veterans. Homeland, also published by Trolley in 2008, is an examination of the militarization of American post-life September 11th, and an autobiography of Miss Wish, Kara Publishing 2017, a story with a survivor of sexual violence who was shortlisted for both the Aperture and Arles book prizes. So, without any further, Nina, it's all you.
Mm. Thank you so much. Thanks, Dudley. Thanks to my co-panelists and to Glenn for the nice invitation, and to all of you who took time out today to show up for this conversation. I'm going to share my screen. And so rather than showing new work, I want to revisit some older work that I did a decade or two ago, which I hope can help contextualize our current authoritarian moment. So after September 11th, 2001, I started a project called Homeland, which looks at the militarization of American life. These are soldiers on a red carpet on a Columbus Day parade 3 days after we started bombing Afghanistan. Oops, hold on a second. There we go. For those of you who may not have even been alive at that time or who have forgotten those days, one of the first things that happened following the September 11th attacks was Congress passed something called the Patriot Act, which greatly expanded state surveillance power and allowed the US government to do things to both people living abroad and to US citizens. We saw ID checks, checkpoints. In New York City, Muslim communities were surveyed. People were picked up and thrown into jail on the flimsiest of terrorism charges. Outside, the US supposed terrorists were sent to black sites and tortured, or sent to Guantanamo and tortured, where some still remain. A terrorism watch list was created that impacted people's ability to travel freely. This is a quote from the ACLU in 2008, but I think it applies today. America's new million record watch list is a perfect symbol for what's wrong with this administration's approach to security. It's unfair, out of control, a waste of resources, treats the rights of the innocent as an afterthought, and is a very real impediment in the lives of millions of travelers in this country. We have seen the stories about border checks and investigations of both green card holders and American citizens today. How could this happen in democracy? First, the population has to be convinced of an enemy that's lurking anywhere and everywhere and maybe hiding amongst us. In 2002, we saw the creation of the Department of Homeland Security. The Department of Homeland Security did not exist before then. So this was a new department with a new cabinet position whose job was to protect against terrorist attacks, to take over the border patrol operations and provide emergency response in case of an attack. Let's be clear, the imagined terrorist was not your white male supremacist, even though people with neo-Nazi and white supremacist attitudes had committed terrorist attacks in the United States. The imagined terrorist was the Muslim other. This agency issued warnings. We heard them all the time on the radio in the morning, or as one passed through the airports, telling us about the terrorist threat level and its corresponding color code. It took me some time as a photographer to figure out how do you actually photograph something that you're hearing on the radio or that you read in the papers, but where's the visual manifestation of this? And so in 2007, I eventually found a town, suburban Chicago, like an hour and a half from Chicago, where a mayor, a former Marine, had erected 3 of these structures in the town. It's a constant reminder that America is under threat. So imagine looking out your window of your home and seeing this every day. It's a kind of provocation designed to make you fearful, but giving you absolutely no information to act upon. Money was sent to municipalities and to county governments to beef up preparedness trainings in the event of a terrorist attack. This was a multi-million-dollar exercise in Chicago, but the script was terrorists have attacked Midway Airport. Children are recruited to play victims. Oops. Sorry, I'm just trying to get rid of this. There we go. This is senior citizen Homeland Security volunteer patrol. So around the country, people were mobilized to search for terrorists, look for things that are suspicious. In New York, we have this, saying, see something, say something. So this was senior citizen patrol in Delray Beach, Florida. These ladies got uniforms, cars, radios, a patrol route. I saw them looking in garbage cans in City Hall, looking for suspicious items. They went to tennis courts, would pick up tennis balls, would snoop around in the bushes. It all seemed so kind of weird and hilarious and bizarre, but this was the construction, the infrastructure of a kind of watchful group, right? And what I learned is, I photographed it like it was kind of a bad cop show, right? With a lot of artificial light, and it looked a little bit absurd. But one thing I learned, which I still carry with me today as I think about this moment, is identity and community building was created through militarized experiences. And these experiences gave people purpose and a sense of importance. If you are a target, you must be worth something. Your life must count for something if people are trying to hurt you. This was also an era where you saw locals creating their own militia watches and border patrol watch groups. So this man was particularly highly resourced. He was building drones. He had 7 German shepherds. He would sit and look south towards Mexico. This is in very southern Arizona. He devised a watch system. So if you were, say, in Missouri, you could hook into a live feed and watch Border Patrol and watch the border, like by Arizona and Mexico, with the idea that if you saw people crossing, you would then call up and report them. Okay. What you also saw at this time was police forces becoming highly militarized. Police forces, as we see them now, did not look this way 25 years ago. So some of this began in the Clinton administration in the 90s with programs created so the Department of Defense could transfer military equipment to local police departments. After September 11th, you would see armored personnel carriers, being given to local police departments. You had grants and how to protect against improvised explosive devices, which were, what was being used in Iraq. And to photograph this, I went to an event in Orlando called a SWAT meetup, where SWAT units from around the country practiced and trained with live fire and competed with each other. I don't know if you can read this, but the bumper sticker on their vehicle says United States 911 terrorist hunting permit. So, in the background of all of this was the constant specter of the terrorist that could be lurking anywhere that justified all of the militarization. Children were brought into this scheme. I went to many, many military recruiting events. This one was in the Bronx, where U.S. Marines, face-painted children, put weapons in their hands. And this is all seen as fun, right? And again, it's so weird for me to look back at these pictures because at the time I took them, it seemed so strange and odd, but it's all been so normalized. Now we don't even think twice if fighter planes streak through the sky, at the beginning of a baseball game. But this, this all sort of took hold after September 11th. So this is Atlantic City. And this used to be an event, this used to be the weekend where Miss America held its pageant, but instead, what we have is something called Thunder Over the Boardwalk. And this is a B-2 bomber, floating in the sky. It was a $2 billion weapon system. And so to me, it's a picture about our priorities that still continue today. We have a military budget that's, if you count everything together, is well over $1 trillion. And yet you have a city like Atlantic City, which is pretty much busted. The billboard where people are supposed to advertise is broken. So this is an armored personnel carrier, going through Times Square in New York City. So the sort of the glorification of the military, the glorification of weapons. President Trump, I guess, is planning for a much bigger sort of military parade on his birthday, June 14th. But this was in Times Square, 15 years ago. You had parades glorifying the military. This is North Carolina, which prides itself on being the most military state. Again, a lot of my pictures, children are referenced to show how ideology is transmitted. And this was U.S. Air Force Day in New York City. I call this picture Souvenir Liberty because this is not the real Statue of Liberty. This was a souvenir statue that was set up along the Hudson River. And I just, placed it in the frame so that it would kind of look like the Statue of Liberty, but it was, just a trinket that was being sold as fighter jets flew by. And then the final thing that really defined this era, and when I say this era, it's like kind of the two George W. Bush administrations, but it's not as though Obama did much to sort of change the culture and, the Patriot Act still exists, is that you had a real growth in mega churches and the power of American evangelicals in civics in political society. So this is Solid Rock Church. You also had like this depiction of Jesus as not a gentle kind of caring character, but as this sort of masculine warrior. This was a mega church in Louisville. This is Bible study. The teacher is dressed up as an army soldier. He's not an army soldier, but he uses the language of the military to teach the Bible. This is New Life Church in Colorado Springs, and this is Missionary Day. So people at the church dressed up in the outfits of the people that needed to be Christianized. So this is someone dressing as a Palestinian man. And you had youth groups. This is the Royal Rangers. It's a kind of more conservative version of the Boy Scouts. The Pledge of Allegiance is made to the Christian flag and to the American flag. And I'm just going to end with a picture that some of you may recognize this family. This is Jim Bob Duggar. He ended up having a reality TV show, which was basically, showing how many children him and his wife could actually parent. And it's like a weird reality show around sort of procreation and trad wives. And so I photographed Jim Bob's family early on as he was running for senator of Arkansas. And I'm just going to end with this picture because when I look at this moment and I'm sort of seeing the power of the presidency and the power of the Republican Congress, I see these three things sort of together is that, American values as they imagine them is a family headed by the patriarch, where the woman's place is in the home, where her value is how many babies she can create. And this is, why we're getting this sort of pro-natalist movement. And that, along with this glorification of the military, the sort of special privilege status that we're giving to law enforcement, has all kind of come together to create, in my view, what we have today. So thank you. And I'll stop there.
Mhm. Hey, Nina, quick question. Oh, also, we're kind of prepared to take a couple of questions in between each presenter. So, I mean, if you either raise your hand or put them in the chat, one or the other, and then we'll do the bulk of questioning after everybody finishes. But I had one in particular. What did you notice about the self-awareness of like everybody that you photographed from the time that you started doing it up until it progressed to the point of where it is now?
Well, like for instance, the senior citizen patrol in Florida, it seems so weird and like kind of funny to me. But then I went back down to Florida 6, 7 years later in another part of Florida. It was still growing strong. They were really serious. Like I was riding in a vehicle with two people and they'd pull up in front of a school in the morning and just watch. And this like young person was crying. And like they were kind of like snooping around in that. And it was just like the person was crying because whatever, they were having an issue with school or their family or whatever. But it just like they felt, entitled. And they'd log everything. And so of course, in the end, it's yes, we're doing this. We love America. We're protecting our country. But, who are they protecting it from? And so I don't see like there was any sense of, maybe this is invasive. Maybe this is intrusive. Maybe this is a waste of our time. And if I want to do something for my community, maybe instead I can go to the library and read books to kids. I don't, so in terms of self-reflection, I don't know. I think people felt very comfortable with the role and in fact proud.
Did you have any access issues at all, or how persistent did you have to be on a lot of the particulars?
Well, the SWAT people, turned me down until the very end and then weirdly just let me come in. And that was a revelation. I mean, there was all these military contractors at that event, and I'm looking at these police forces assemble, and it looks like they're assembling for war, and I had some very interesting conversations with some of the weapons salespeople there. Like there was one guy who was trying to sell this massive rifle to police in Miami Beach, and he said, he creates this scenario. You got terrorists, they're coming in with a speedboat, in Biscayne Bay, and and don't you want the biggest, baddest gun that you can possibly get to take them out? And it was like, well, of course you do. Like, how do you say no to that? Right. But like how likely is that scenario? And so I think that, one of the things that you see in American society is that the planning is for the most extremist, outrageous event. And even if it can seem so beyond the possibility, we're going to prepare for it, train for it, purchase for it. And if it doesn't happen, well, that means because we've done all the right things to keep us safe. Meanwhile, what a waste of time and money. It's so it seems to me, but that was the conversations.
Somebody has in the chat, what was the most important aspect of your research for this entire project?
I think understanding the value, like the sense of identity and community value that was really created through these experiences, um, and um, and how that bonded a community together, so that when people were doing, in the tiniest town that happened to be close to where the Little League Baseball Hall of Fame, World Series happens, they saw themselves as a terrorist target, right? And so, like, you could go anywhere in the United States and people would see themselves as a terrorist target, except maybe New York City, where people were like had moved on. But this sense of like community building through the idea that people hate us because we're American, and how dangerous actually that could be.
Mm. Okay, so that was really really effective. I mean, really really nice work, and you've got a lot of kudos here. Folks are just loving it in the chat, but we can talk about it more later on. And for any other questions at the end. I want to move on to Ed Kashi and Julie Winokur. Ed is a renowned photojournalist, filmmaker, speaker, educator. I've known him for a while. Baker, he does a whole bunch of things really, really well. And he's been making images and telling stories for 40 years. And he has a restless creativity and has continuously placed him at the forefront of new approaches to visual storytelling. Julie is the executive director of Talking Eyes Media. She's been a storyteller for over 2 decades, first as a magazine writer and then as a documentary filmmaker. And she's launched Talking Eyes Media in 2002 as a way to create visual media that catalyzes positive social change. So let me turn it over to the two of you.
All right. Hello. Thank you. Thank you, Glenn and Dudley and Richard and Nina and Julie, of course, for having us. Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah, we're seeing the thumbnails still.
That again. Okay, hold on. I thought I had solved that. So what we want to share with you, hold on, let me just get this. Still thumbnails?
Yeah.
All right, hold on. Jules, you want to start while I figure the text stuff
out? Sure. So we're going to share some new work with you. This is a work in progress. A couple of years ago, we began a new project called American Sketches. And this is Ed and I returning to our roots of doing photography with text. For years now, we've both been doing a lot of video and filmmaking. So this is, for us, an opportunity to get back out in the field, get back to our roots. And we really started the project because we felt we had lost touch with our own country. We were feeling like we just didn't really understand. You know, it's that big question of like, who are we? We didn't feel that relying on the media's interpretation was adequate. We wanted to really visit firsthand 2 locations that we felt were emblematic of some of the big issues going on, but really looking at them from the perspective of them having the issue descend on them rather than they're being the instigators of these issues per se, and trying to look outside the news cycle to better understand what's going on and how it's impacting people on the ground in a very intimate way. So are you able to get your slides up, Ed?
Are we still in thumbnail or?
Yeah, you're still in thumbnail.
Sorry, folks.
So what I might do actually, because I was planning to read passages because as a writer, I felt it was a nice opportunity to share some of the writing while Ed is going to go through photos. So at least I can set us up if you're close, Ed.
I hope so. Sorry about that, guys. How's that?
There you go.
That's it. Thank you.
It's very unusual to have technical.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, folks. All right, Jules, carry on.
The world is full of stories, and most of them aren't true. These sobering words came from a not-so-sober novelist friend at a party in San Francisco shortly before we began our journey for American Sketches. At a time when our country seems turned inside out, Ed and I have gone in search of some truths, but the reality is they are just stories, not more, not less. We went to Eagle Pass, Texas, not because of the migrant crisis, but despite it. From a distance, Eagle Pass sounds like a place where drama jumps out of the cracks in the pavement, high-speed chases rule the roads, and trafficking of one sort or another is just commerce as usual. On the contrary, we found a relatively quiet, deeply rooted town that feels more like northern Mexico than the southern United States. So hold on this picture for a moment, Ed.
Yep.
This is kind of like occupied territory, says Pancho Navarez, a former Texas state representative with a buzz cut and tattooed biceps. His property borders the Rio Grande, and between the migrants climbing the banks and the Border Patrol agents scouting by land and by sea, it's hard to know which occupation he's talking about. Growing up, Pancho's father always referred to white people as Americanos, people distinct from Pancho and his family, despite their deep roots on both sides of the border. By all accounts, Pancho's family is more American than my own, which arrived 2 centuries later. Next. Pancho's blue Land Rover kicks up dust as he takes us onto his 500-acre ranch. As we round a bend, random bits of clothing strewn in the scrub give way to a garbage heap sloping down the side of the barbed wire fence and covering the road. Backpacks, diapers, shirts, bras, and pants. They look like they slid off their owners as they ran to safety. Toothbrushes and medicine packets, condoms and baby toys litter the ground as though the alluvial flow of humanity has left its sediment behind. The men, women, and children whose detritus lines this road have reached the promised land, and they've tried to shed their old selves in the dirt. Pancho served in the Texas state legislature until he got caught with cocaine at an airport on camera. He knew he was in big trouble, not the slap on the hand kind of trouble, but the existential kind that if he didn't get sober, he was likely to wind up dead. Despite his digressions, Pancho still polls well if he decides to run again. But since rehab, he insists, I'm too sane now to be in politics. When the dispatch came into the fire station, Julio Valdez told me they had a floater, so we jumped into his truck. In the past, there might have been 6 drownings per year in Eagle Pass, but in December 2023 alone, the fire department recovered 17 bodies from the river. I've heard the Rio Grande called deceptive, devious, dangerous. I'm told that when migrants walk across the shallow parts, they sometimes hit unpredictably deep divots where they get sucked down and swept away. For people who've traveled thousands of miles fleeing unbearable circumstances, the river is just one more challenge in a series of ultimatums. What is a narrow stretch of water when salvation is a rock skip away? We stand solemnly by the side of the truck, the woman's body just 10 yards away. She lies inanimate, a human not being, without breath or beat. She's covered in mud, flopped on her side, arms extended, shirt and sweatshirt stretched overhead, exposing the straps of her bra. I wish she could pull her shirt down, more comfortable. The indignity is just too much. I came in search of this moment, but now that I'm here, I'm not clear exactly why. Professionally, I'm here to bear witness, to make sense, to share with others so we can correct our mistakes. But on a personal level, as a human being standing on the bank of the Rio Grande, I wonder whether my presence will do anyone any good. The weight feels incapacitating. There's a thick band of flesh across the woman's midsection that looks like she's wearing a weightlifting belt. It's her exposed skin turned scaly and tarnished, as though her flesh has fused with the river's life force. Ed starts to circle at a healthy radius, searching for an angle to photograph the woman as respectfully as possible. She is beyond consent. His purpose here is singular, to secure evidence of this moment. Unlike me, he doesn't have the luxury of recreating the scene at a later date. We share the belief that by documenting her plight, we can be that beat of a butterfly wing that alters the course of the universe. If one shutter click can save one life from suffering the same fate, then our work has value. We do our best to breathe life back into her story. Cornelia Muskis shows us a dirt road used by Border Patrol that's visible from her terrace. A widow who lives alone, she keeps a pair of black men's sneakers outside the front door to deter unwanted visitors. During the pandemic, a Honduran woman knocked on Cornelia's living room window, startling her. She gave the woman some water and told her to keep the sun on your left and Mexico on your right, so she could find her way to the train. Cornelia, a white woman and devout Episcopalian, raised her 3 children in Mexico on the family's ranch, 45 minutes from the nearest town. Her hazel eyes, pink-rimmed glasses, embroidered blouse, and gentle demeanor are camouflage for a tough frontier woman. She carries a 9mm pistol in her purse that she says she's prepared to use, and she recounts in a soft-spoken voice being held hostage for 2 hours at gunpoint in 2014 by members of a drug cartel in Mexico. The fact that she lived to tell the tale seems statistically impossible. It is one of many anomalies we encountered in Eagle Pass. Elias left Eagle Pass at 18 to attend the University of Southern California, but once he got there, he realized he had no way to pay the tuition. The porn industry provided a means to get through college. it also became a gateway to drug addiction and an insatiable quest for physical perfection by any means. Despite his high-risk lifestyle, he earned a bachelor's in international relations, followed by a master's in clinical psychology, all the while living at a precarious edge. After 2 overdoses, he fled to Eagle Pass to survive. Elias tells me that running for Eagle Pass City Council was the second most traumatic experience of his life, second only to sexual assault. As a former gay porn actor, Elias didn't appear to be a contender when he ran for office, but his superpower is turning vulnerability into strength. And the people responded. "I'm not perfect, but I won't lie to you," he said. The voters handed him their trust. As they did again just last week, 4 years after his first election. The dirt, it's all about the dirt. The Mississippi Delta boasts some of the richest soil in the world, which is what drew white settlers here in the early 1800s, regardless of the inhospitable terrain. Today, this alluvial plain lies eerily flat and naked, stripped of its forests and wrestled into symmetrical rows. Nature's tangled riches have been raked into submission in one of the most unholy testaments to human grit. In the Mississippi Delta, civil engineers have managed to reroute the most powerful river in the United States. By contrast, more than 70 years of civil rights have failed to resolve the course of the Delta's racial divide. From persistently segregated schools to the railroad tracks that cleave neighborhoods apart, every conversation in the Delta circles back to race. It infuses the soil with 1,000 underground creeks, and like fertilizer, it nourishes tall stalks above ground while poisoning the dirt below. Watson turnip seed grew up in Sumner, Mississippi, the site of the notorious Emmett Till trial. His family was on a first-name basis with some of the perpetrators, and his grandfather attended the murder trial. Decades later, Papa Frank co-chaired the committee to make 3 notorious locations designated as the Emmett Till National Monument. Farming runs deep in Watson's DNA. The Mitchners came to Mississippi in the 1830s looking to tame the land and reap the profits. They acquired 15,000 acres, most of which is now rented out. Watson's great-great-grandfather served as a proud soldier in the Confederate Army. His great-grandfather had the presence of mind to sell off his cotton the week before the market crash of 1920. And Grandpa Frank was president of the U.S. Cotton Council. Now Watson, a 30-year-old lawyer in New Orleans with very progressive ideas, has aspirations of reclaiming his family legacy. He currently rents 500 acres from Grandpa Frank. Christy Miller climbs down from the bright green tractor, braids piled high like a turban at the top of her head. Her skinny jeans tuck seamlessly into faded cowboy boots, and her hazelnut skin radiates back at the setting sun. Tired and gritty, the 12-hour workday has taken a piece of her energy. She's incubating 2 little ones in her belly, and her tan work shirt strains against her breasts when she pulls the waist edge down over her belly. Christy's part of the 1%, her husband Robert says from the sidelines. He's referring to Black farmers whose numbers have been declining for decades. Christy's family owns 600 acres and leases another 1,000, but it still isn't enough to grow the Mississippi Delta's white gold, cotton. Christy tells me that requires at least 6,000 to 7,000 acres before it's profitable. And then there's the high-tech harvester and the weekly crop dusting, all of which put cotton out of reach for Black farmers. At 33, Robert is a transplant to the Delta. Every day he builds street cred by mentoring young men in nearby Jonestown, a town of 857 people in deep need of attention. The poverty rate runs at 54%, and if it weren't for jobs at the Amazon warehouse over an hour away, the median income would be even lower than the current $18,000. The day we went squirrel hunting with Jimmy McClellan, He had a metastasizing black eye that stained his cheek moss green so his entire face looked uncannily like camouflage. A survivalist who owns a successful security company, Jimmy is said to have brandished a semi-automatic weapon during a George Floyd protest in Cleveland, Mississippi. His brother died from a heart attack on these same hunting grounds, and he tears up recounting that day that he was helpless to save his brother. We go home empty-handed. Jimmy clings to conspiracy theories. He's convinced the government, if that's who they are, want us all to drive electric cars so they can control us. He swears by the Epoch Times as the only trustworthy news source, and I'm reluctant to tell him it's published by the Falun Gong, a specious religious cult. Jimmy also loves his weed. His latest venture is a weed business with his son. It's hard to imagine a more animated backdrop than Orlando, Florida for the war on woke. The Republican backlash against everything conservatives find offensive about the left. Nowhere do the extremes live in closer proximity than Florida, where Governor Ron DeSantis signed a rapid succession of conservative laws, which in turn unleashed a volley of progressive lawsuits. At the same time, pride flags are flying from buildings, books are being pulled from school shelves. Kim Short has barely missed a board school meeting in years, and she joined Moms for Liberty. Kim's motor lacks a neutral gear, and she keeps revving forward. Why does sex have to be part of books that we offer in school systems? Why do we have to talk about sexuality all the time? I mean, why is there a whole month about it? We're in the midst of Pride Month, and avoiding rainbow flags is about as easy as avoiding mouse ears at the Orlando airport. With barely an inhale between thoughts, Kim says, there's this MAP group, which is minor attracted people, which is pedophiles. Call it what it is. They're actually part of the LGBTQ element. And there's a flag that they've actually incorporated into the pride flag. It's like a triangle with all these different colors in it. And then they have meetings. And I'm just like, we've gone too far. I don't want this in schools. Blam, just like that, the wheel's flown off its axis and the whole cart is hazardously veering off the road. I'm holding onto the seatbelt, wondering where she heard about this fetishistic group and whether it even actually exists, let alone whether anyone would ever introduce it into schools. It apparently does exist as a new way of destigmatizing pedophilic urges, but the LGBT community has not condoned it, nor agreed to share its flag. Orlando, surprising, lush tropics, lakes everywhere, not Disney, separate worlds, not such a small world after all, grayer, queerer, transer than expected, pride is in the air, so is the vacuum grip of conservative backlash. The girls at Southern Nights, one of the oldest lesbian clubs in the country, let their freak flags fly, a deafening throb of rap and reggaeton and mounds of flesh, breasts and buttocks on stage, dollar bills passed from teeth to teeth in a haze of aggressive fun. Boys with legs waist-high, platform shoes, and close-cropped afros. The sexy, sexless, gender-affirmed, hetero, homo, poly, amorous lust is love. Shea Cutliff arrives at the beach in a leopard skin bikini and oversized movie star sunglasses. A large, unapologetic presence, she helps her boyfriend set up a blue nylon tent that heads straight to the ocean. According to Shea, her full name, Shayani, means steadfast, confident, and outspoken. Shea says she always knew she was a girl, and her family accepted that. As a young child, she went costume shopping for Halloween with her mother and her godmother. As she tells the story, my god sisters were like, I want to be a princess. I want to be a witch. And I was like, I want to be a princess too. My godmother was like, you could be a warlock. And I'm like, I don't want to be a warlock. I want to be a fucking witch. Who the fuck told you I wanted to be a warlock? An argument broke out in the store, and Shay's mother said, I want my child to be able to wear whatever they want to. Suffice to say, the costume made its way home, complete with red rouge, eyeliner, and lipstick. Jarrett and Justine Johnson have found a right-sized Christianity to live by. Church in America today is not what Jesus intended, said Jarrett. Instead of talking about love, they talk about stopping abortion. The Johnsons homeschool their 4 children, own several cafes in town, and don't claim a party affiliation. Their lives are hybrid, earthy, spiritual, entrepreneurial, 21st century roadmaps that allow them to move forward while staying connected to the past. As I stated at the beginning, these are just stories, nothing more, nothing less. They're the bricks we use to build our communities, our jobs, our opinions, and politics. They're momentary facts molded by perspective and solidified by selective memory. Ideally, they will help us create a shared reality, a common narrative. Thank you.
Okay, that was pretty brilliant, y'all. You have this word picture dynamic and synergy like down, yeah, and you're making it look easy. And I know for a fact that it's really not that easy all the time, and it really depends on how the photographer and how the writer come together. Real quick, because we're going to move on, we'll get back to it afterwards. But how did you like plan through all of this to make sure that what you're getting is going to be valuable to each of your mediums?
Yeah. Well, you should have been with us a couple of weeks ago in Eagle Pass when we had nothing to do in days and we're desperate, going like, what are we doing with our lives? But no, I mean, honestly, this is Julie and I have been living and working together for over 30 years, and this is a chance now to sort of make a dream come true where our kids are grown and we can really focus together, and we're going back to like our roots, which are words and pictures.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what this is about. And we're giving ourselves the freedom of years to work on this. And Julie, your writing is amazing. It's really the first time I've heard this. So and we believe in the power of words and pictures.
Mm-hmm.
We believe in the power of intimate storytelling. And what we find so frustrating, and I might have missed this while I was monkeying around with tech stuff while Julie introduced us, is so often what we see in the media is so goddamn frustrating because it's whether it's reducing things to tropes or it's overcome with Trump derangement syndrome, which is rightfully understandable. We're really trying to get past all that and just work together as a team to tell these stories and show also the complexities of our fellow Americans, that, Jimmy McClellan is a MAGA diehard, but he's also a pothead. And, there's just so many, it's so much more complex than it's meant, than we make it out to be.
Yeah, the nuances really come through really strongly, like the pothead thing. It was a nice surprise to hear that, but being able to kind of identify those things is really kind of a key to making storytelling really, really work.
Yeah, or just if I may, like Elias in Eagle Pass, who's Mexican American, goes to LA, becomes a porn star, almost dies from this really tough lifestyle, and then comes back and he is now bringing in millions of dollars of grant money to his community. The firefighters and the police of that community backed him in his reelection campaign because, as Julio said, he has brought us mental health support. So that's what we're trying to do, is uncover those subtleties. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. We'll come back with more questions afterwards with the group. I want to move on to Richard. Richard Sharum is an editorial and documentary photographer based in upstate New York, and mainly focusing on socioeconomic justice, dilemmas concerning the human condition. And his work has been regarded as in-depth, up close, and personal. And he's done a lot of exhibitions. His selected ones are in Kyoto, Japan, Sao Paulo, Brazil, Italy, New York, Boston, Chicago. And now he's got another body of work, which is he's compounded several stories into and to be a collective thought, I guess, in terms of like what he wants to say about Americana and its dynamics. So without further, Richard.
Thanks, Dudley. I want to thank Glenn, of course. Him and I have known him for several years now, and I'm just so thankful to SDN. It's one of the last remaining strongholds of documentary work that's out there. And so thank you to all the supporters that support him, and for him, of course, him and his wife for putting this together. I want to thank Nina and Ed and Julie, of course, for being a part of this. I think it's really important to be talking about our country right now. Our country is, it may seem really frightful right now, but I think, if you go back and look at the history of our country, it's a pendulum. It swings one way or the other. We talked a little bit about this in our pre-panel meeting a couple of weeks ago. And so, with what I'm doing, with what I'm going to present to you today, I wanted to talk about, you know, first of all, what is the purpose of documentary photography? For me, documentary work should always serve as a bridge between two different groups of people who may never speak, either through lack of desire or through distance. And so for me, a lot of the problems in this country, I feel, have always boiled down to miscommunication, misunderstanding, and being in a bubble, if you will, of information. So my entire life is, I grew up in a mixed race family. I grew up in a very high crime, lots of violence, high poverty area in the south side of Corpus Christi, Texas. And so I grew up in this environment where I was more interested in talking to people and understanding who they were as individuals than how much money they had or where they come from or any of those things. So my entire life, I've always just kind of tried to, look and see what the base alloy is of most of our problems as a people, not just in this country, but across the world. And so for me, photography is my way of really kind of exploring those things, both for myself and for, what I hope to be the general public whenever I can document these things, present them, publish them in books, and talk about these things in opportunities like this. So you kind of just get into it. So these three projects that I'm showing you comprise a trilogy of work that I'm doing on my own country. The entire trilogy is titled Of Thee I Sing. And so I decided, I started doing three different projects that were completely separate from one another. And then I realized that all three of them were kind of talking about different issues in our country right now. And so I decided to make a trilogy out of it. And so that's why the trilogy is titled Of Thee I Sing. Volume 1 is Spina Americana. It's a book that came out of Goss Books, who are based out of London. It was published this last November. It's my second book. And it's Spina Americana, which is American spine in Latin, where I traveled up the central United States for 3 years. Volume 2, which I'll show you here in just a second, is scheduled to be published next spring, also with Goss Books. That's American Homicide. And then the third volume is American Avenue in 2028. So I'll go through all three of those now. This is Volume 1. This is Spina Americana, where I spent 3 years up the central United States. Now, what prompted this was I was interested in what was going on in the United States specifically because of what had just happened. So I had always wanted to do something on my own country because of the division that has been happening here really since the election of George W. Bush in 2000 is when it became really pronounced. And you had sort of this polarization of news happening and all these things happening where people were starting to become really divided politically and socially, culturally. And I was really interested in documenting something in that nature, but I wasn't quite sure what. I won't give you the whole long story, but essentially what happened is I was I happened to be home traveling. I travel a lot for what I would my work, but I happened to be home on January 6, 2020. 2021, January 6th is 2000, I believe it's 2020, 2021. Sorry, I'm losing it. But when they stormed the Capitol, when a lot of Trump supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol. And before I became a photographer, I was in school to be a history major. I was a history major to specialize in the U.S. Civil War and the area before, leading up to it in the year Reconstruction, right after the U.S. Civil War. And so whenever I saw these Americans, my fellow Americans, storming the U.S. Capitol to protest, a democratically, elected president, I knew we had hit a new precipice. So what I did is I wanted to go and find and discover a part of my own country that I had never been to, and that was up the central United States. I had been to Oklahoma, but I had never been to Kansas, Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota. So I decided to go up the central United States to find out who my American people are. Who do I belong to? And I wanted to just pick a section of the country that had, you know, had voted a certain way for a long, long time and find out why and just see who these people were. I realized that the central United States had essentially been ignored politically, socially, and culturally for decades. And so they've always kind of voted in one direction. So I wanted to also see how these people would treat someone like me, who is an atheist and a progressive. So I drove for 3 years, like I said, and I met people along the way organically. Um, the only thing that I had to kind of pre-plan or get permission for was when I photographed at one of the prisons in North Dakota. I went there on 3 separate occasions. But for the everyday people I was driving around, I wanted to see is how diverse, how complex this part of the country was. I had heard the term over country for my entire life, talking about people flying over the central United States because, there's nothing there, as far as the viewpoint of most Americans, there's nothing there worth stopping for. So I wanted to see who these people were. I wanted to find out what this part of the country looked like. I went down to the U.S.-Mexico border all the way up to the U.S.-Canadian border, right through the central part of the country. And this is at the U.S.-Mexico border. This gentleman right here operates the only hand-pulled ferry across the U.S.-Mexico border. So I spent the day with him and his fellow workers. I even put my camera down and helped them pull with a rope the ferry across the river back and forth. They do it all day, and they make about $50 or $60 a day. They do it 7 days a week. This gentleman was in Pearsall, Texas, also on the U.S.-Mexico border, or close to it, and he picked vegetables for a well-known grocery chain in Texas. He is actually from the town of Piedras Negras, which is actually where my grandmother's from. I mentioned earlier I come from a mixed-race family. So it was interesting talking to this gentleman right here who traveled 4 hours a day to go work in the fields and then go back to Mexico. I also spent times at Native American reservations. This was in South Dakota. They have a lot of issues, obviously, on U.S. reservations, and I just wanted to go and see who, like I said, my fellow Americans were. This is a farm in Kansas. This is a good example. I'm always trying to find moments in my work, at least, where I'm trying to essentially draw out the humanism in people, because humanism is relatable across all strata of our society. It doesn't matter what language you speak or even what border you're contained within. It's these moments that I'm trying to find. These young girls were about to go swimming on a swimming hole on the ranch. This is a Mennonite community that I stayed with for almost 2 weeks in Kansas. They allowed me full access. They treated me, even though they knew I was an atheist, they treated me like I was a brother. I stayed with one of the families. We had lunch every day and dinner. And this is a gentleman who took me ice fishing for the first time in my life. I thought I was going to die because he drove onto this lake. So he had just caught this fish, and I took his portrait with it, and then we skinned it and then ate it right there in his little hut. This is also on the U.S.-Mexico border. These are not sequenced, by the way. I was interested in just kind of taking a view of what our country looks like. A lot of people do not understand what happens in this part of the country. It gets written off a lot by being just a bunch of old white farmers, when it was anything but that. I also didn't discern on who I was willing to photograph. Even though I'm a progressive, when the governor and who was then the governor of South Dakota and her lieutenant governor came across myself and found out that I was doing a book on the central United States, they were willing to sit for or stand for a portrait for it. So this is at the State Fair in South Dakota. This is obviously Kristi Noem, who's now the head of Homeland Security. And And I wanted to essentially include her and her lieutenant governor in the book because they're a source of power in this part of the country. They're seen as leaders. And so I didn't want to discern, or I didn't want to differentiate between the power that she holds in office versus those who have a sort of, personal power. And I wanted to equalize them in a way. I'm not impressed by man-made or artificial power, if you will. I'm more interested in who you are as an individual. I may not agree with anything that Christie does politically, but I thought that she was worthy enough to include in my Spina Americana work. And it didn't matter who it was, like this cowboy that had just gotten into a fight at a rodeo because he won and his rival didn't like it. So in a way, I'm individualizing all these people that I met, but I'm also using them as a collective, as a group of individuals that make up what it means to be an American. This is also on one of the reservations that I photographed in South Dakota. This is their private, personal buffalo herd that they manage for the reservation for their people. This is a storm chaser. I was with storm chasers throughout those 3 years, chasing tornadoes. The whole idea was to take a portrait in front of a tornado of a storm chaser because they're part of the makeup of the people that live in this area. Even though I almost got killed by a tornado, I didn't get that photograph. But this is a moment right after a tornado just dropped on top of us. It just didn't work out with the photo, with the portrait. This gentleman was fighting a fire in Kansas. And right after this photograph was taken, the wind shifted on us and blinded both of us. He ran in one direction, I ran in the other. So I never got to his contact information. I don't even know if he knows he's in a book. But he was very happy and very proud and that I wanted to photograph him and what he does. This was a nudist colony that I stayed at several times in Texas. I was interested to kind of show that there's, like I said, a very complex, diverse group of people that live in this part of the country. And even though these two individuals are hardcore Trump supporters, and they knew that I wasn't, they fed me, they let me stay at their place. And so all of my work is essentially just trying to bridge these divides. I'm more interested in what we can talk about as a group of people that highlights the connectivity we have as individuals and as a group, than always focusing on divisional tactics and like divisional language. For me, problems will never get solved as long as we continue to focus on those things that divide us. And so I think that everybody has a chance to be redeemed. I think everybody has a chance to get along. We just have to talk about the things and understand the things that are important. Things that unite us, if you will. So let's move on real quick to the next project, which is American Homicide. And I want to warn some of you now that, if you don't like extreme images, I'm sorry, but this is what we're talking about. With American Homicide, I was really talking about, with Spina Americana, like I said, I'm using these projects as as arguments about these larger American issues. So Spina Americana was really about American division, right? Our division that we have currently in our society and how it's getting worse. It was my attempt at try to break through that division, to understand who these people were as fellow Americans and introduce them to the rest of the general public who may not know about them. With American Homicide, I was really interested in understanding a group of people that I didn't trust, and that was police. I grew up, like I said, in a very high crime area where police were not trusted, and they had questionable tactics from what I saw personally many a times. So I didn't really have a lot of trust in law enforcement. And after George Floyd, my trust obviously grew even worse, just like most Americans. But I decided to go head first, just like with Spina, going in an area that was unfamiliar to me with people who didn't vote like me. I wanted to go and introduce myself and get embedded with a group of law enforcement um, who I knew that their job must be the most extreme, and that is homicide. So I became embedded with one of the largest police departments, homicide units in the country. I followed 4 homicide squads for almost a year. And then I started to kind of document them and their lives and at work and then also at home with their families and comparing, contrasting what they have to deal with as individuals because they get just seen as a badge most of the time. No one ever actually thinks about how it affects them and their family. So I started to kind of take a step back and think about, well, what am I really talking about here? I'm really talking about what I think is a growing lack of empathy in this country. We see murder as entertainment. It's in almost every documentary you find on Netflix. It's in almost every romance novel. There's homicide somewhere. There's even homicide in cartoons. We're so desensitized by it that we don't notice it. And it's not that I'm some evangelical where I want to cancel all murder in movies and stuff. I enjoy a good murder mystery myself, but I do think that there's a cumulative effect where society is desensitized to the point where they see homicide and murder so much as a means to an end, as a way of solving a problem, that they don't think about it until it affects them personally. So I started to also document victims and their families, and I documented perpetrators and their families. I went to, in addition to being on crime scenes,
Excuse me,
like
Richard.
this father.
Let me just interrupt for a second. We're getting to the end of time here, so if you can go through this pretty quickly, that would be great. Instead of going through all the images that you have for this. Okay. Sorry.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll just go through this really quickly. This is American Homicide. Like I said, documenting the lives of homicide detectives, victims.
Could slow down a little bit. You know, give us a little bit of time to take in the pictures.
So, with homicide, like I said, it's about this growing lack of empathy. I wanted to also talk to perpetrators' families and see how it affected them that their son or daughter were in prison for the rest of their life because they took the life of another. So I went to 8 prisons in two states. Some of these are crime scene photos. This is a family in a hospital who just found out that their father was killed. It's these types of moments that don't really get talked about. They don't really get shown. You don't really get to see these things. This is on the desk of a homicide detective. This was his first case. I also wanted to talk about home life for detectives. There's a detective on the horse in the back. His son had just fallen off a horse and literally almost died in front of me. So even at home, he's having to deal with these kind of conflicts of life versus death. This is a father who lost his son to murder, and that's a homemade memorial in the backyard. This is the homicide detective at home with his family. He feels disconnected from them because of the things that he sees every day.
Oh my God.
This is the victim of arson. This
Oh.
is a body dump in the river. This is another detective going to Lent with his daughter. And this is a detective who just had a newborn son, who all day he has to go and try to investigate the deaths of other people's sons. These are rounds found at homicide scenes. Do I have time to go through American Avenue?
I don't think so. I think we're going to have to
Okay.
stop here. Sorry about that. But thank you for that extraordinary presentation of work and the extraordinary work you're doing. It's important.
No problem.
Richard, real quick though, there are a couple questions in the chat for you. And you had mentioned your religious beliefs. And question is, did you find it important to share your political or religious stances with your subjects? Did that ever come up, or did you have to position yourself with that? You know?
Only when they asked. For me, I didn't want to introduce that because I didn't want them to presuppose or judge me based on my beliefs or my political affiliation. I went there as an American. I went there to highlight them as Americans. So unless they asked, I didn't just come out and tell them that I was progressive. But if they saw me driving up in my electric vehicle, they usually estimated it.
But like when you had those conversations with them, how did was that a plus in terms of like your access or your connection, or
They
did you?
didn't care. I think most people don't care about these things, but people assume that people care about those things, but usually when they're in their groups or bubbles. I went open-handedly, open-hearted, vulnerable to these individuals. They became open-hearted, open-armed, and vulnerable to me. And it was a beautiful transaction. And I think that if only 10% of our population were willing to do that, we would live in a different country.
Okay. Well, we're going to continue this after the whole thing. But thanks a lot, man. It's really, really powerful work.
Thank you.
And thanks for doing it. That's the other thing. I'm going to share screen real quick and show you a project that a few years old. But this is from the Washington Post magazine. Are you seeing a full screen of a cover?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
I never quite sure. So I always have to. Um, so like I said before, I've been really dealing with this topic in one way or another, unofficially or officially, for probably 45 or 50 years. As Glenn mentioned, I did a project 35 years ago, Songs of My People, which was a documentation of African American
All
community.
right, Alicia.
35.
I've done all I
Huh? Oh, somebody's not muted. Um, Using 53 black photographers to kind of make a different viewpoint. And so it's something I've been interested in. The Washington Post magazine, we used to do a photo issue. And for the one that turned out to be the last one ever before the magazine closed, we decided to do one on Americana. The reason I chose Americana was because I used to hear folks talk about it, and the references to what Americana was. And when I would see the photographs that they were connecting to, it was usually white folks in rural community and ice cream and ponies and farm and very rural societies and small towns. But as you've been seeing, like today, Americana is something that's a lot more vast, and it's uh, a lot more varied in its approach, and it's a lot more varied in its experience. I've always kind of said that folks of color and are just not sitting around woe is meing about problems or woe is meing about situations, or we're all concerned about it, but for the most part, I think that all of us just are more concerned with kind of living a life and having our children live lives and our family members. So I'm going to run through this real quick so we can get to more of a discussion about everybody's. But the key thing is this woman photograph from Vanessa Shalom. This woman's name is Dorothy Williams, and she's holding the one possession that she has left of her father, who was a World War I veteran and a businessman, rather wealthy businessman, who was found dead in 1954, whose body was burned and chained to a tree with an empty gasoline can nearby. He was lynched, and no one was ever held responsible for it. But this is the one thing that she held on to him. And I think it's ironic that she held on to an American flag. And that's the valuable thing that was left. But I'm going to run through the layouts as they ran, because I think it's.
Can you tell us who the photographers are, particularly the cover image? It was such a stunning
Yep.
photo.
Yeah, we used 11 photographers. And I can go through them as we go. Photographed by Andre Wagner out in New York. It's Jamel Shabazz out of New York. And what I did was, there were 3 photographers who had been working on a similar project. Brian Branch Price had been doing an Americanas from a Black perspective. He had hit me up and said, I have this work. Amy Sacka had been doing somewhat of a revamping of Robert Frank's The Americans, and she went back to every location that Frank had made a photograph from and modernized it to see what it was like there. And then Hector Emanuel had hit me up about doing something on Americanas from a Latino perspective. So that was combined, but then we mixed in some other photographers to round out the entire picture. But this is from Brian Branch, Jamel Shabazz out of New York. This is one of Saka's pieces. Taylor Irvine and Amy Saka. Amy, Brian, Hector Emanuel, and Andre Wagner. Brian Branch Price again.
I think you assume that we see something, but we don't. At least
You
I
don't see
don't.
this?
No,
I
I'm
just
seeing.
see.
Are you seeing a screen of you seeing layouts? Is everybody seeing layouts?
Nope, I see you.
Yes.
No, but we see the pictures.
Yeah,
Oh,
we
you
can,
do?
we
I
can
see the
photo.
pictures.
I see the
think it,
I see the
pictures.
pictures.
I think
Okay.
it might be a setting on your Zoom. I'm not sure how to change it. I've had that happen before in other
Okay,
classes.
that's my
Go
problem.
into
then.
go
Okay,
into view. Go into view because it's working for most people.
okay.
It's up top where it says see screen.
Upper right.
Yeah. Oh, upper right,
I'll
upper
stop
right.
until you get it.
You say go to view, it shows me show manage participants and close chat. That doesn't look very helpful.
You don't see side-by-side speaker or standard as an option?
Nope, I do not. But I don't want to sabotage this whole meeting. It's not about me. So just continue, and it's my bad luck.
No,
No,
it
it's
is
on the
about you.
top,
Go ahead
it's on
and
the
give it
top
one more.
header.
It is about you. Give it one more stab real quick.
Actually, one other thought. In the top left, there's an option, a pull down, it says meeting, and it might have another option.
No,
No, it does
in the
not.
center, if
Oh,
you,
wait. Dudley Brooks screen. Maybe
yeah,
that.
that's it. That's it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
No
Thanks for your.
problem. We're not gonna like block you out here, okay?
Thank you.
Shout out to the Netherlands.
Another photograph, but I mean, you know, the normalcy has always been very interesting to me. And the way people live their lives. I mean, everybody's got issues, but I mean, at the bottom of it all, I mean, folks just want to kind of get through this and raise their children, enjoy themselves, do the best they can with their lives, have fun, and make the best of it all. And so, you know, a lot of for me, a lot of normalcy is really things that, you know, has a lot of value to depict that. That's Amy Sockers again. You can see the photographers spread up in the top, up in the caption there.
No, I'm not seeing any images. Are the people still seeing the images?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Make
Click
sure
Dudley
you,
Brooks
Yes, we
screen
are.
at the top.
at the very top, click where it says Dudley Brooks screen.
Okay, it's back.
You got it? Okay.
We don't hear you.
Oh, I didn't say anything yet.
That's why.
My thing is if the pictures don't talk to you, they're not going to tell you any more than what I would tell you. So that's um so all in all, I mean, I think that we've seen some examples of like different points of view of like how to interpret Americana, and there are more ways, you know, and I think it has an experience attached to it. It depends on who's telling the story. And there's no specific way of how to tell that story because I mean, if we do it correctly, America's just a vast place that has a lot of different issues attached to it, that has a lot of different perspectives, and it has a lot of people. And I think now the conversation is even more vital because we're looking at possibly a situation that, or force, or an administration possibly that is trying to focus that into a pipeline that might not be as inclusive. So there were a lot of questions that came in, but I want to find out whether anybody has any new questions that are that you want to just kind of toss out or comments.
Before we move on, Dudley, I just want to thank you for sharing that amazing Washington Post magazine. I'd never seen it. It's really astounding collection of work. And
Oh,
I just
thank
want
you.
I just want to ask, were you aware that that was the last issue when you were working on it?
No, that was actually the next to the last issue. That was the November issue, and then the last issue was in December. And you know, we had been trying to kind of push the envelope on the type of things that we did for the photo issue. Like one time I did we did a whole issue on how photographers would interpret the term racism through an interpretive photography approach. And different photographers had a different way of how they photographed racism, not race, but racism. And so we would play around with a lot of different topics to complicate the matter or come up with make sure we could have a lot more interpretive viewpoints and the types of photographers we could bring on board. But no, we didn't really know. Kind of just abruptly stopped. But you know, the mission continues. So we just keep on going in other directions. So
Dudley is this is Colette Fournier. Really nice to see you. I'm sure it's been
hey.
years. Listen, is Amy Saka, is she still around?
Yeah, she's still around. I haven't talked to her since this project though, but she's still out working. Yeah,
And
all
where's she based?
working.
He's in Detroit.
Right.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.
Oh, no problem at all. So does anybody have any question for the whole panel, or does the panel itself have any comments? Um, oh, come on.
Feel free to just Simone has her hand raised. So Simone, why don't you unmute yourself and ask your question?
I wanted to ask when Nina and then somebody and other people had mentioned this, the idea of whether this is the worst time in the world or not. My mother-in-law lived through the Holocaust, and my neighbors did also here. And I also remember, I don't know how many people here are old enough to remember Duck and Cover. A few of us. I mean, I remember sitting in my classroom in a two-room school in upstate New York, hiding under my desk, being absolutely convinced that the Soviet missile satellite, never mind missile, satellite was headed directly to my two-room school. And so I think there's a, someone else is laughing. I think that there's a phenomenon of terror that is very strong now because of the internet and because of, like we're showing each other images and people are, I watch people when I go to New York, I look at what people next to me on the subway are looking at on their phone, and it's sort of scary. But I think that it would be interesting to see somebody go back and find photos from the duck and cover era from that sense in the 50s that our enemy was about to come right to our shores. So that's just my question, my comment. Maybe Nina wants to respond to that or some of the other people.
So is this the worst time we've ever lived in? I think that, we see certain patterns of state power that we've seen in the past, whether it's the Cold War era. I mean, there's a lot of similarities between the 50s Red Scare and what we're seeing now. Of course, the difference now is we have global warming and climate crisis, which, adds a whole nother existential dilemma or, terror to our existence. And so, in that sense, I would say we're in a pretty bad way. But I just finished this amazing book by Clay Risen called The Red Scare, and we had lost our minds as a country during that time. I mean, we were criminalizing all sorts of people for, the tiniest little things. We had hundreds of thousands of people under investigation. And, J. Edgar Hoover was, the man of the moment with Roy Cohn. And so I think that there's something like deeply embedded in American society about protecting the realm, imagining, the enemy, mobilizing around the enemy. The enemy now is queer folks, trans folks, immigrants, I mean, we're all kind of the enemy as long as we don't fall in line with the MAGA agenda. And so, how we break through that, getting to know our neighbors maybe can help some. I'm not totally convinced, but yeah, that's just my take on it.
Of course, also now the kids today are not going under their desks because of Soviet scares, because of a fucking American gunman. So talk about a sad irony of what we've evolved to, from a existential threat that never really probably could have happened to something very, very real. So,
Richard?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I mean, it's just a whole new set of problems. You know what I mean? I mean, we've had some problems that were, thankfully solved, or not solved, but at least, figure out on some level. And now we just have a whole new set of problems. Instead of Soviet bombs, we have gunmen walking into schools and shooting 24 children. That's the kind of thing we have to worry about, especially as parents like myself. But the bottom line, I think, is that problems are solvable. I think that's the thing that needs to be remembered, is that all of these things that we have in our society, even climate change, that is something that's going to take an international response. But I mean, the problems we have specifically here in this country, I think it needs to be remembered that those things are absolutely solvable. And as soon as we give up on hope on that, and we just kind of say, well, you know what, this country sucks, I tell you what, it's going to get even worse. So that's all.
Yeah, the thing that bothers me the most is the compliance. Right. So, we kind of knew that if this particular administration, I mean, or however we want to phrase it, attitude or philosophy was allowed to flourish, we pretty much knew what was going to happen. I mean, this is not a surprise per se, so I mean, this was all kind of like, we were informed about this. The thing that really alarms me is the compliance, and how readily and easily a lot of institutions that we trusted as being a lot more progressive and a lot more forward thinking are not exercising their power or their opinion. For instance, when DEI, when the administration first came out against DEI, there wasn't necessarily a corporate mandate that said, okay, we're going to get rid of all these programs within all the institutions, private and federally. Okay, it was more of a federal thing. The thing that disturbed me the most, that I thought was just very disheartening, was how at the mere mention of a federal mandate or federal executive order, you had all these private companies who hadn't been approached or who hadn't been pressured, all of a sudden started getting rid of their DEI programs, And I'm like, so nobody forced you to do that. That was a choice that you decided to make on your own, which made me say, well, wait a minute, why were we trusting you in the first place? What was it were you really sincere about these things? Or was this just something that you were doing because you were made to do it? And as soon as that ceiling was lifted, then it was all just, go off for joy, So, Kathleen, you've had your hand up for a while.
Thank you very much. Thank you to everyone. This was really powerful and inspiring. For any of the panelists, I am curious about any feedback that you have. Our work is needed more than ever before. Well, I mean, it's all relative to the time we're in, but it's really needed now. So any word about courage, like how what drives you? Like the word that comes to mind to me when I'm thinking about some projects that I'm going to be moving on to is it's not so much courage, but the necessity that it needs to be done. And kind of like, if not me, who, that sort of thing. I'd be curious about that. And then, Dudley, to speak to your matter about platforms that we can no longer really use in a way because we'll get doxxed or whatever. And so thank God for Glenn and Barbara and this platform. And is anybody else using other platforms such as Substack or Blue Sky to showcase your work? So it's kind of a two-part question. Thank you.
Anybody got the first part?
Yeah, I mean, be honest with yourself. I mean, like all of us got into this business to do what we eventually ended up doing. I think, like I definitely got into it because I knew that I wanted to be a photographer or a visual communicator in some capacity, and I knew of this photographer, but I just happened to be in a bookstore and I ran across the book by Gordon Parks, Moments Without Proper Names. And that charted my entire path, still to this day, even though I've added a whole bunch of different things. So we all got into business because we kind of wanted to say something, and the way that we found to make the statements that we made with through visual communication or through writing or whatnot. But we all had a point of view. I always warn students about getting into the trapping of saying that, well, I'm a journalist, I need to be objective. Well, nobody can really be truly objective. That doesn't necessarily exist. You can be fair, but the fact when you walk into a room and you go to the seats on the right or the seats on the left, that's a subjective decision. You make that's based off of comfort. So I just say stay on the path. I mean, they can't get us all. And there's a lot of important work. There are a lot of important stories that people need to tell. And when I always say when we age out, there will be other people behind us that will be looking forward. They will be looking to us as examples and be looking to us as mentors and teachers. And so that's another way of how to keep things moving forward is by offering that service. So I just say stay honest to yourself and stay on your path. Majida, is it? Is it?
You're muted.
Unmute yourself, Majida.
Okay. I want to make sure I pronounced it correctly.
Can
Go
you
ahead.
hear me?
Yeah.
We hear you fine.
Oh, you can? Okay, good. Hi. I'm on a cell phone. I really appreciate the whole program. And about solvable problems, we have new tools. We have BDS, boycott, divestment, sanctions, and other tools. I'm getting my BA in ethnic studies next year. And I noticed that when we speak about terrorisms like climate change and others, I'd like to bring to the table the genocides that are happening. And also let you know that in California, 4 universities are, the students, they are doing hunger strikes against genocides. And yeah, that's it. Thank you very much.
Well, activism is so important, especially today, and it's just so great to see all the people across the U.S. coming out for so many different issues right now.
Yes, thank you.
I'd actually like to just take a step back and address Kathleen's first question about fear. And I just wrapped up an 8-day workshop, teaching documentary photographers, how to hone in on their projects and stuff like that. And it just made me think of this really long discussion that I had with him one day. And the thing about this obviously is biased because I'm a documentary photographer, but I think documentary photographers are the baddest mofos in photography because they do it strictly for a passion. They don't do it, they put themselves in harm's way mentally, physically, spiritually. There's no money in documentary photography. They're doing it strictly because, yes, they have something to say, as Dudley said, but they think that they are part of a larger system. They think that, they have an understanding that we are small pieces in something larger than ourselves. And that's what gives me courage, at least, when I'm going and I'm having a gun stuck in my face, or I almost got stabbed in Las Vegas, photographing the people that live underground there. It's these instances where yes, we're in danger, but if I'm not willing to go underground and photograph the 2,000 people that live underground in Vegas, who is?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And so that's the thing, is that it's weird how it's not even a thing. When I was in Brazil and had a gun stuck in my face, and then I ended up documenting the people that almost killed me. It's those types of situations where you sometimes second guess yourself as to why am I doing this? What is this worth? Who's going to care? But you have to push forward and you have to keep doing it. I don't know why. Maybe it's some sort of mental illness, but it's frustrating sometimes, for sure.
Shane, you have a question? You have your hand up.
I do. It might seem really contrary at this point. It's actually a two-part question. I will start with asking about, I asked it in the chat earlier about words and the balance between words and images. So today, actually, there was a lot of focus on words, more so than the images, it seemed. The images actually seem to be supporting of the words in a lot of the cases versus the traditional photo essay. So I'd be interested in hearing people's thoughts on how those are balanced editorially from the viewer's standpoint, etc. But I don't know if more importantly is the right word, but I'll say more importantly, what I get a lot is social documentary photography is often about the sad, the disturbing, the shock effect. That's how something gets an attention. Attention is brought to a subject, which I totally get. But I also would like to ask what the role of humor, joy, satire, celebration, subtlety, bringing together the things that we have in common, or the more subtle social problems that don't involve murder and guns that we have to deal with. So those are my two thoughts/questions.
Well, if I could address the first part of it about words, what we're doing today is not a book, it's not an exhibition. It is photographers talking about their work. So just the format of today's presentation lends itself to words more than other presentations of
Sure, absolutely, yeah.
Material.
You gotta tell your story. I think it's all valuable. Like when Ed and Julie were presenting, it was fascinating to me. All right. And it's like I was kind of sitting back, I'm like, wow, this is like watching cable. Like something really cool on cable. And that's what good research and good stories do. And
sure.
Like, to use them as an example again, you have to find a way of how to effectively tell your story about whatever that is. And there's no monolith in terms of subject matter. The very fact that you were here, the very fact that you do what you do, or you're interested in doing this, is enough. for you to like say, okay, fine, I'm going to go out. I have something I think people need to know about, and then you take it upon yourself to go out and do that work, and then you find a place to put it. And the thing about now is, even though a lot of the traditional venues are drying up, okay, or changing or altering in their point of view and altering in their circulation or whatever. New ones are opening up. And it's, I tell younger photographers now, it is easier to publish something now than it ever was before. And so just, I just say, you got an idea. It could be about the happiest thing or the most pleasant type of situation. There's a story there that you can tell that is very, very relevant to a lot of people that you don't know. But unless you create that, you're not gonna be feeding your tribe. So
I'd love to just say, oh, sorry.
Go for it,
ahead,
Julie.
Ed. I
No,
was
no,
just
go
going to
ahead.
say, I feel like there are many outlets for the work to be shared, and each outlet asks a different, sort of a workload from the various media that are going into it. So we're working towards a book, and we made a decision early on that it would be a text-heavy book, and that it would not be just a photo-driven book. So that was a very conscious decision on our part. So then within that lies the onus on us and on me in the writing to make sure I'm telling you something the pictures can't tell you, which I think is always, that's the rule of thumb when you combine words and pictures. You've got to feel that the words are not just a redundant of what you're witnessing, because a photograph is going to do that more effectively, present a visual situation. But there is an entire world going on around that photograph. And so I find sometimes it's almost a little frustrating to think that you're supposed to get the entire story from the pictures, because there are so many more dimensions happening. So I'm of a mindset too, when you create bodies of work, you think about the multiple platforms you might be sharing that body of work, and how do you repackage, repurpose, and change that structure, change the weight between the different elements. Sorry, go ahead.
No, finish, and then
I was just going to say one thing about your second question, only because to me that's a really sweet spot, that it doesn't always have to bleed to be interesting. And I feel like I'm always trying to find that place between the cracks that isn't getting enough attention. And I feel like part of the problem with how we've ended up in the dynamic we inhabit today is because we're so busy hanging on the extremes that we are losing sight of subtlety. And it's cheapening our experience of other people. It's cheapening our experience of our own lives, because they should all have a certain heightened, extreme, emotional or dramatic content. And I feel like and I'm hoping younger people, just recently, our daughter was saying that she's noticing that movies are sort of slowing down, that she's seeing more and more movies where shots are on for a long time. And my heart sings when I hear that, because I'm hoping that we will pass through this phase we're in, where we need to be like titillated by everything. And, in what some contexts, we need the dopamine rush from everything. And I'm hoping that we're all going to kind of reevaluate and be able to say, oh, well, I know personally, like when I think about how much gun violence is in media, and I say that in terms of entertainment media as well as journalism. And then I think, does that actually resemble the world I inhabit, my immediate world? No, it doesn't. If I lived in certain neighborhoods, yes, that would be more prevalent. But it is so consuming that it makes me feel like we've lost track of what real life is. And I so appreciate, Dudley, I'm so happy you showed this Americana magazine that you put together, because I feel like that was rich with the life that we do inhabit and witness and, celebrate, and needs to be elevated.
So I just wanted to also talk about the importance of words with pictures, because there's a responsibility to contextualize our imagery. Now, I believe in that idea that an image you shouldn't have to say anything about an image and it says something. But when you're working in the realms of photojournalism or documentary photography, non-conceptual documentary photography, there is a responsibility to make clear, not only make clear what the image is about, but it, like as Julie so beautifully showed in the presentation, it adds layers to the image. So I have no problem with that format. Also, I think it's really important whenever you begin a project, especially a very big project, that you know what is your sort of visual strategy. What is it, what is it you're trying to achieve in the end? Because the sooner you know that, then the more all the energy and creativity and planning can go into fulfilling that vision, if you like. And then in terms of your comment about, where's the joy and the humor and all that, this is something I've felt for a long time about, particularly the world of photojournalism, less so about documentary work, is that there's sort of a very narrow, if you like, emotional bandwidth that is not allowed, but that is often used in that medium. And I welcome expanding that and showing love and joy and beauty and all those things. But because I think contests and other forms of feedback and guidance, if you like, especially for younger photographers, you don't get awarded for making pictures of people laughing. It's that kind of thing. I'm being very simplistic here, but it's just true. That World Press and those organizations that affirm or one's work, especially when you're getting started, it's very much about drama and violence and all that. So I think this idea of expanding the emotional range of the work in these fields is critically important, because as we've seen with our kids, they're not interested at a certain point in seeing depressing work. And then just last thing I want to say, which sort of galvanizes in my mind or synthesizes all this, and this is something that I and Julie have been trying to do for the last 10, 15 years, is this idea of solutions journalism or advocacy work, where you shine a spotlight on a problem, you pull no punches, you try to do the best you can to show the drama and all of that, but then you also kind of show solutions or ways in which that problem might be being addressed or ameliorated. And I think that is a really great way forward for journalism and for certain kinds of storytelling.
Hey, Nina, what say?
Yeah, I mean, I've personally struggled with this question of by showing so much pain and oppression through the bodies of people who are being oppressed or through their stories. Are we failing to imagine another world that's possible? And and I don't know the answer to that. I know that next year I'm going to be taking a break from what I normally do and working on a project to, with people who are trying to, imagine different ways of living outside of capitalist systems, and to see if can I even make this kind of work? Can I make work that prioritizes collective relationships and collective action for the greater good? Or am I destined to just make other kinds of work? I don't know, but I think it's an important question. I think it goes beyond the question of photojournalism's, emphasis on if it bleeds, it leads kind of thing, and more about, do journalists have the right to imagine different worlds as opposed to just critiquing our status quo? Because when you critique the status quo, there's a certain amount of acceptance in that status quo. It's like, okay, this is the framework that we're living under. So this is the shitty part of it. And, we're going to like scratch away that shitty part of it in the hope that kind of reforming it will, benefit society. But I don't know if I'm still believe all that. So.
Richard, I see you thinking.
Yeah, sorry, I just had to mute myself. I just wanted to address both of those things. I think that words and photographs can be absolutely effective and powerful. I don't use a lot of words in my work. I wrote a small intro for Spina. Campesino, I didn't even write an intro. I let two other writers write essays from Cuba for that book. But for Spina, did my intro, and then for American Homicide is going to have a ton of words in it, but not from me. It's going to be from detectives, perpetrators, mothers, mothers of victims, and that kind of thing, to kind of let them speak for themselves. So I think it can be effective. Um, I'm also putting out a memoir next year of my the very beginning of my career when I went and photographed Hurricane Katrina. That's what convinced me to become a documentary photographer. And I also have those same criticisms that you mentioned in your other question about pain and violence. And my biggest fear in doing American Homicide is to be accused of those of the same thing that I criticize in our society, and that's this bloodlust of horror and death and struggle. Because I do not want to be lumped in with those people. It's in fact the book is an argument against having a society that is built on bloodlust. But I have to show what it's like to be a homicide detective. I have to be accurate. Um, I was changed psychologically from doing this for almost a year. I battled a lot of depression. I was drinking a lot because of the things that I was faced with on a day-to-day basis. I was on a conveyor belt of death, and I have to show what these detectives have to deal with so that the general public understands what they have to deal with the next time they watch their, Netflix documentary and eat their bowl of popcorn and then go to bed safely. This is feeding a multi-billion dollar industry, on murder, on the death and the struggle of people. And I think it's sickening. So I struggle with that as well. When I photographed children fighting cancer for 4 years at the beginning of my career, I could have photographed a lot of kids suffering on tables, but for me, those powerful moments when kids had moments with their parents, or parents had moments with other parents, or two kids who were battling leukemia, were playing with one another. Those types of moments, that humanity that I spoke of earlier, is the most powerful, tool for empathy. And for me, that's the only way that we can solve problems in this country, is by utilizing that form of mediation between people. But sometimes you got to get down and dirty. But that is not the goal, at least not for my work anyway.
I'll give you two short ones on each one of those things that you brought up, Shane. Okay, so I covered the crack wars in DC during the 90s, which was crazy. It was just crazy. And I was also like on night shift. And every time I would have to go to a shooting, some 17, 16-year-old kid had gotten shot or whatever, wherever it was, you go to the scene, you go to the neighborhood, 11 o'clock at night, and you're making photographs. Body might be there, might not, but the police are there. There's always some like 9-year-old kid who lives in the neighborhood who's standing around watching all this. You know what I mean? And I'm like, okay, I have to now kind of make photographs that interpret, that I feel interpret what this 9-year-old kid who is not going to get in his car or her car and go home. They're going to have to go in their house and sleep on the floor. So there's that perspective, in terms of like stories are stories, and you'll know if what's for you in terms of what stories you want to tell. But all of them can be told in a way. Every subject can be told in a way that's considered to be effective and fair. Fairness is the key thing. And then on the writing aspect, whenever I would get a photographer, or I would try to get a photo essay for wherever I was working, I would always try to get photographers to submit some photo essays. And they would, come up with this brilliant set of pictures. And I would say, okay, now I need you to give me 500 words on this, write the intro. And they would like, say what? Yeah, just give me 500 words. Three. We'll cut it down to three, but give me 500. Well, I don't really write. Yeah, but you can do this. Just go ahead. Just write, write something out. I'll get you an editor. We're gonna make it look great. But I just think that your perspective in terms of like what it is that your wordsmithing can say. And 9 times out of 10, it would be it was be amazing. And they would say, "Hey, I'm really glad you got me to write this thing because I wouldn't have done it otherwise." It's like, yeah, I mean, you're a creative, and so it might be a muscle that you're not necessarily used to or that you're not using, but it doesn't mean that you can't be effective at it. in some way. Okay.
Dudley, I think we need to bring this to a close. We're going on 2 hours, and it's a half hour longer than usually we go. So let's bring this to a close. Would anybody like to say a parting comment? Dudley, I invite you.
Oh, no, you go ahead. You go right ahead.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. I mean, it's been an extraordinary afternoon, all of these presentations and the discussions, each in its own way, showing extraordinary work and ideas. But it just reminds us how complex this nation is, and I think as Richard Sharum keeps telling us, we need to understand the vastness and the complexities of this country. I think all the photographers are working for that. I mean, the progressive part of this country needs to understand it as much as the other side of the country. We need to find some common ground here. We're by no means even on that path yet out of the woods. We have a long way to go still, and things are probably going to get pretty bad before they get better. But I commend all of you for doing the work you're doing, for struggling with these issues. I want to thank our audience here for staying with us and for being engaged in this panel and everything that STN does. And Dudley, thank you for a brilliant job at moderating this.
Thanks for the invite. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
We will let you
you.
know when the recording is available.
Stay vigilant.
Thank you, Glenn, for organizing. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, peace.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Really, really great. Thank you. Take care.
Thanks, Kathleen.